probably half an acre to 3/4 of an acre. If we multiply that of what the perimeter of those ponds would be, times of 5,500 or more ponds within the city or the county of Sarasota, we probably have more shoreline of stormwater ponds in our county than we have shoreline from Florida to New York City. So when we put it in that context, the shoreline from Florida to New York City is very important. So that means that the shoreline in your backyard is very important. And it gives us a way to think of doing our fair share of what we can do in our hometown to make a difference on a grand scale. And it really does make a difference if we take care of the pond behind our own home. So what I'd like to do is open it up to questions to say what's of most interest to you.
Sure.
If you'll wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you. I'll even stand up. My pet peeve, the reason I came here tonight, is I'm bothered by all those fences we see around these ponds. And I'll give you some egregious examples. At the corner of Lockwood Ridge and DeSoto, there's a chain link fence around a pond. And over there at another one, perhaps more prominent one, this is how the school board spends money. At Booker High School, they have two beautiful ponds by the newly created Booker High School, and they put wrought iron fences around these ponds. And this has just always bothered me from an aesthetic point of view, and even from just as an environmentalist point of view. It seems like it's divorcing us from nature. And my question to you, and I don't know if you're qualified for this, do you know of any county effort, a county that has successfully managed to eliminate the requirement? Because I understand that this probably comes from either insurance issues or perhaps maybe some other statutory issues. Do you know of any county that has managed to eliminate the requirement to put fences around these ponds, or better in an effective way? You know, which one stands out, if any county, or is there any effort on the statewide level?
Well, I'm not aware of any counties. I've seen it be individual. I know that not every county-owned pond is fenced. I don't know why some of them are fenced. It may be a DOT, Department of Transportation requirement, and I'm just unaware of it. Shano, are you aware of that regulation?
Yes, we had a pond dug at New College on our Caples campus, and I asked if there would be a fence around it, and I said no. And then I drove in one day and they were installing a fence. And I asked, why do we have a fence? And they said, well, it's a liability issue. And it has to do with the fact that the slope of the pond coming down to the water's surface is a different slope than a submerged slope. And therefore a child or someone might presume that the slope was continuous and they could simply wade in, and that would enable them to get in trouble, whereas if it was a continuous angle, there'd be less liability. So we eventually got the fence removed. We've had no lawsuits, and of course there are many ways to drown at New College. We're on the bay. But it may be that some of these ponds have a relatively steep underwater portion, and that invokes the fence. It's also possible, Mike, that the schools are just trying to avoid kids coming in with muddy feet or splashing around or whatever.
I think there are issues that we made, and I think that's a good one, and I think the insurance is the key.
Who do you think owns all these ponds and lakes that are in the county and in the state of Florida? The taxpayers do to a certain degree, but some of them are private, and then it depends upon when the pond was developed. Now, I live in Gulfgate, which is on the south side of Sarasota City itself, down near Siesta Key. And I live on a pond, and there's no fence around it, but there is a liability issue. One day I looked out in the pond, and there were some kids out there, twins, and they're really wild, and they were swimming out there and having a good old time. But, I went out there one day to take out some cattails, and I was wearing hip boots, and I had a rake, and I got out there and I moved around, and my hip boots got stuck in the muck, and the head of the rake pulled out, and here I was, and I finally got back to the shore. But I thought, but anyways, I think you need to check on the ownership of these ponds and see what happens. Now, I tried to get the county to take over our pond and to control it, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't even listen to me. And I had quite an argument with them about it. And there is a stormwater group, and I think it's for the public, and I think it's for the county to go after these private ponds and make them public oriented, because the public benefits with the stormwater collection. So I think that's another thing you need to look at. Now, I'm from Michigan, and it's the land of 1,000 lakes. Probably more lakes in Michigan than there are in Minnesota that has the claim. And we have a long shoreline as well. And I own some property that has a private pond on it, and also a river, one of the major rivers goes through it. And so they do a lot of pollution. And one of the problems they have there, I'm sure you have here, is all the pollutants that are picked up from the air that come down and go into the water, and also from the roofs. And, the sewage treatment plants can easily become overloaded, but you have to do something with these pollutants, and how much can Earth tolerate, because this all lays back to Earth. We want to preserve Earth, and if we lose it, we're going to lose our civilization. Everybody will die. So anyway, I just wanted to express some thoughts.
Thank you.
That sounds like a segue into what to do with the mucky bottoms of a lot of lakes.
I didn't mention that earlier, that the microbial formulas have been very effective at reducing certain kinds of muck. When we look at the black, gooey stuff at the bottom of the lake, that's unconsolidated sediment, which is usually organic material, which means it's almost all leaves and sticks and grass clippings. So that type of organic material is, breaks down with certain types of algae. And the algae or certain types of bacteria, the bacteria or microbes that break it down are very, very similar to the type of microbes that are in our own gut or our intestines, where one microbe breaks it down a little bit, the next one breaks it down a little bit more, and then two more break down some of those parts, and it's this long chain that breaks it down part by part. And different microbes and enzymes can facilitate, what I would call the bio-dredging or biological mechanism that breaks down that type of organic material. So this is one more, sort of example of how using Mother Nature's method is very effective at keeping the lake or pond healthy in that manner. We saw it we were just talking about a lake or a pond in Sarasota where they had 42 to 48 inches of muck at the bottom, and through a microbial process we reduced it about 14 inches in probably about 18 to 24 months. Far better than I would have expected, but any type of organic leaf-based muck is very amenable to a biological approach to reduction. Inorganic sediment like sand, that is not at all, but most of our sediment in the ponds here is organic, because we only have a certain amount of sand that's blowing in here from the beaches. We're not in a desert situation, so almost all of the sediment in our ponds is organic material, so it works very well by being able to be reduced with a microbial approach.
Well, one of the things I want to explain here before I start. I'm an engineer. We design the ponds, so I have an answer for you. And the ponds belong to the homeowners association, just like the streets belong to the homeowners association, and they're all private. And those are regulatory agents, regulatory requirements from the county.
But they don't accept their responsibilities.
Pardon?
I said they don't accept their responsibilities. The county of Sarasota.
It's not their responsibility.
Well, if they
it
own
will
it.
never be their
We
responsibility.
can't go back and forth, it won't get on the video.
Okay, I was just answering his question. What you're doing when we design those ponds is first a geotech engineer goes out and they determine what we call seasonal high water. And the seasonal high water is where the overflow structure or the outfall structure elevation is set. From there, the littoral zone, which you're speaking about, which is 30%, it's normally set here in Sarasota County. It's set at 18 inches below the seasonal high water. Now, as you well know, when you go out there, sometimes the water level can drop as much as 4 feet below the outfall structure. But one of the main problems in these ponds, and they're talking about mud on the bottom and stuff, is wind erosion, where the wind erodes the banks, and that's where you get these steep drop-offs. The banks are designed at what Jonathan was talking about there, or John, I'm sorry, was talking about there, and they're on a slope of a 4 to 1 originally when they're designed out to, and I can't remember the depth of water, and then we can drop them to a 3 to 1 or a 2 to 1 slope, and that's where you get the depth in the bottom, which is what he was talking about. And the reason you do that is you take the fill material out of the pond and you build the subdivision accordingly. Now, where you were talking about fertilizer, there's no way you're going to keep fertilizer from getting into the water, because we design what they call a split design, and that's where approximately the middle of the structure, middle of the house, or the middle of the lot, we drain water first to the street in one direction, and we drain it to the pond in the other direction. But the water that goes to the street goes into the gutter, it goes to an inlet, it goes into the stormwater, which goes into the pond. So it's all that fertilizer, no matter where it's placed, is going to get into the pond. Some of the questions I have, and I've never seen an answer, and that's not really my area of expertise, it's yours, is like littoral shelves. The littoral shelves are notorious. We put them in, the plantings are put in, and then the water level drops below the littoral shelf and everything dies. I've never seen an answer for that.
Thank you. Do you want to discuss that further?
Well, the shorter answer is that we go through some droughts that we just, no matter how well designed the pond is, they're designed for the average, weather system. And as we go into some droughts, the water does drop, and then some of the plants will go dormant on the littoral zone, and some of them will just die because it just stays too dry for too long. I have seen some areas where I have documented, it wasn't exactly a littoral zone, but it was a low-lying area near a pond where I know for a fact that it was dry for 3 years. When we came out of the drought, the water level came out, the entire area was flooded about 12 inches deep, and it was completely covered with fragrant water lilies. And it was a shock to me to see an area that was once what I identified as a meadow became a completely water lily covered part of the pond. I think with the design of ponds, the main goal has been originally for flood control and secondarily for pollution control. So the idea of the pond is that it is specifically designed to hold nutrients in there, and the littoral zone was designed to solve 2 environmental problems. One was reducing suspended solids or sand and silt and organic material that's suspended in the water from going off of your property, down the creek, and into the bay. Littoral zone works extremely well for that. The other thing that littoral zones were designed to do was to sequester and tie up nutrients from the pond, so the nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, couldn't go off your property, in the creek, and into the bay. Littoral zones don't work very well for that. They work very well for the suspended solids, but they don't work particularly well for the nutrients. And that's where we're seeing the microbial formulas working better for nutrient reduction than the littoral zone itself. So when we think of the pond and the pond design, we have to look at, originally the pond was dug out, it made the finished floor of all the homes in that area high enough so they were above the floodplain and safer from floods. The pond stores flood water and holds it for about 4 weeks, and lets it trickle off so that we don't cause flooding from our subdivision downstream into other communities. So the ponds have been working extremely well for the main functions they were designed for. We're enhancing that design by some of these microbial formulas by even getting more enhanced water filtration or water cleaning with a biological Mother Nature type of process. And all the ponds, whether the pond is owned by the county, and there are hundreds of county-owned ponds here, or whether the ponds were owned by the homeowner association, they're all designed to the same standards. And, you know, the older ponds are slightly different standards than the brand new ponds, but it's just our governmental model, just like some streets are owned by the county, some streets are owned by private homeowner associations, same way with the ponds. That environmental infrastructure is owned by, it's since the mid-'80s, those typically are owned by homeowner associations and become the responsibility, just like their landscaping or their tennis court or other infrastructures that they have. Any other questions?
I can address a part of that. I live in a neighborhood of 110 homes. There are 9 homes around a spring-fed lake in our neighborhood, and the abutting property owners are the owners of that lake, not anyone else, not the county, not the neighborhood association. So I think it's quite variable.
Hi. I have basically 3 things I'd like to talk about. One is our subdivision just put in a grant application to put in a floating island with plants in it. Actually, I think we're going to do 5 and 2 lakes, total of 5 and 2 lakes. And I was wondering if you have any experience with that. Second question, before I get run over, is we had an erosion problem on the bank. So we got a company in and they filled these long tubes, 2 levels, like one, maybe about 24 inches thick. Each one is about 24 inches thick. So they filled both tubes. So we have almost 48 inches at the edge of the lake. So it kind of makes it a little tricky to plant. Yeah, you familiar with that process? Okay. And then the third question is, when you talked about the microbial, how far down, this is something we would want to implement right now. How far down the line are you on your research with the microbial approach? I mean, is it still basically, you know, a testing situation, or is it something that can be implemented now? So those 3 things. Thank you.
The first one is the floating islands. We've installed floating islands. Floating islands have had enough research behind them that they are able to be utilized for some of the municipal nutrient load regulations that, you know, trickle down from the EPA Clean Water Act. So the floating islands have been highly successful in reducing nutrients. They're basically function with 2 principles. One is that as the plant, you have a rubber mat similar to these half-inch thick rubber mats you might get for children to play on. They have holes in it, and inside the holes are flower pots, and inside the flower pots are hydroponically growing plants. Different, sometimes we call them the Disney plants when they're all the pretty plants that bloom, you know, red and yellow and blue. Or we put wetland plants in there that grow. All of those plants tend to have roots that will grow down 2 feet, and on all the roots will be trillions of microbes. So what we're creating is a microbial media out in the middle of the lake. The other way that those islands work is that once a year, you pull the island in the shore, you rip off or at least half of the plants, and then replant it with new plants. So you take all that plant material out of the lake. So you're reducing nutrients by removing plant material from your lake. So from both of those principles, the floating islands have been very successful. We have to really monitor the water quality, because if the pH is off, the plants won't grow hardly at all. So you have to understand the water chemistry in a lake to be able to determine whether that's an appropriate solution for your particular lake. In some lakes, the floating islands thrive, and in some lakes, the floating islands don't work very well at all. The next set of questions was about the geotube type of products that are designed for erosion control. And The only thing I can say with that is that it's very popular right now. We would want to make sure that you know the research on the particular product you use so that you don't buy a product that is susceptible to UV radiation that could break down in 10 to 15 years. As far as planting, there are many different plants that will grow around the shore of your pond. Every plant has a little different requirement, and you just put the plant in that is happy at that water depth and that height behind those tubes. So there's plenty of plants that can grow up on the top where the turf is, and plenty of plants that can grow down in the water. You just have to pick the right plant for the right depth of water you have. And then my memory is not good enough to remember the third question. The microbial research is both proven and new. It is the sort of the latest generation or the frontier of lake management, but we have seen in many cases throughout both the United States, North America, and Europe where we've seen research consistently in the same group of microbes. There are categories or families of microbes that we see that work particularly well, and the research is being repeated throughout the world. What we've done is that the research we did with Cornell, our problem was that our numbers came out so good that we don't think anybody's going to believe us. So we're looking for another round of funding so that we can replicate and expand the research and duplicate the results, because it's great to have good numbers when you're doing research, but when they're so good, people are going to say there's got to be an error, And so that's our dilemma right now. But we're using it. We're seeing from an anecdotal standpoint, we're using it in ponds. And we're seeing a drastic reduction in algae on some of the ponds that we've worked on. So as a company, we're using it because it's working, and so we're happy that it's working because we're not putting in these harsh chemicals that kill everything else. And what we see is that when we take a pond that has been chemically managed for decades, there's always this awkward, ugly phase that the pond goes through as we start transitioning to a more biologically balanced, healthy ecosystem. So we always ask our customers to be patient with us as we nurse the pond back to health so that the microbes and the snails and the clams and the freshwater mussels can start doing their job cleaning the lake rather than cleaning the lake with chemicals.
What's the difference between duckweed and algae? I see a lot of people that want to kill every bit of duckweed that they see, and yet the critters eat it.
Well, duckweed is a tiny